I'm not going to spend a lot of time. We only have an hour, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on intros. But is Erin there? Yes, hi. But I do just want to, it's so good to see you. Wait, I don't even know if you can see me. This is also very confusing.
I can see you, Katie. Hi. I can see you guys.
Okay,
hi,
great. Hi. The three women that we are talking to today are incredible. And I don't say this, I mean, I'm not saying this because, you know, superlative, and everybody's fabulous. These three women are incredible. And I had the pleasure of meeting Kate a couple of years ago, literally right before, like 5 minutes before COVID broke out. And I met Jen today, but her amazingness has been traveling through the grapevine for years. And then Erin Minthorn, of course, is one of the TransLink Master's Program graduates that I've gotten to work with for years. And so we've known each other. And it's just these, the way that you describe your experiences and how it's been and the honesty that you bring to the table is really incredible. And it's incredible how humble you each are because you're just amazing. So I just want to preface it with that. And I also I knew they'd be introduced several times during the day. And so I asked them, what's your favorite UNC moment? Since we're talking about UNC grads. So Jen right here, Jen Davis, has an incredible diplomatic career, foreign service officer. Is getting ready to, have you started working with, yes, is working with the US ambassador to the UN, you know, not a job everybody gets, and was Consul General in Istanbul, right, has served with Secretary Clinton, Kerry, and Condoleezza Rice. I mean, really just incredible. Since we're both old ladies here, I can say that you were part of UNC's 200th graduating class. I was here at the same time. My favorite memories, she says, are of Keenan football Saturdays in the autumn, yes. And she says, I always hear in my mind the Charles Perrault commercial about UNC when I walk through campus in the fall. She says she definitely left her heart beside a poplar tree in McCorkle Place, so we can all relate. She's traveled to over 100 countries. It's been an amazing journey, she says, but like Thomas Wolfe, I am always looking homeward. So this is Jen. Get your questions ready. Right. Kate Hewitt to the left, also powerhouse. You are, I remember the last time I introduced you and I kept having to say nuclear non-proliferation, which is hard to say 10 times in the intro. But you have had also amazing experience and very exciting. You're starting a new job at the Department of Defense in 3 weeks in the Office of the Secretary of Defense Policy, right? As the lead and advisor on multilateral arms control and non-proliferation. See? Really hard to say. Non-proliferation next month. Also working for the Pentagon is no small thing. You were with the Peace Corps in Moldova. You worked for Brookings. You had a FLAS fellowship for Farsi. You have an MA Global degree from here. My favorite memory of Carolina, she says, was rushing Franklin Street, a little behind everyone else. I'm not going to ask about that. When they beat Gonzaga, her other alma mater, where she got her BA, in the national championship in 2017, a bittersweet victory, but Carolina truly lit up that night, and I'll never forget it. Again, these are like actual people who've experienced the same things as us. So this can be you, right? This is the message. Erin O'Connor Minthorn spent almost a decade in the Foreign Service, served overseas in Beirut, in London, working in DC on East Africa policy issues, and serving in the Defeat ISIS Coalition Office until she left the Foreign Service in 2018. She's been in the private sector since, first at Raytheon Technologies. And for the last year, she's been the Senior Director of Government Affairs at Resilience, which is a new biotech and manufacturing company born out of COVID. She's working to make modern medicine more quickly and safely. So thank you for that. She received a master's here at the TransLink Master's Program, a BA from Trinity University in Texas. And she says, in terms of UNC memories, it's funny because I didn't spend a lot of time on campus. She came here for the TAM program, spent a semester, and then went to Prague. So she says, my best memory is actually my plane ride to Prague, where I spent the winter semester at the Charles University in TAM. I grew up in the middle of Texas, she says, and so besides a few trips in college across the border to Mexico, I'd never traveled to another country. So because of UNC, I was on my first international flight to the Czech Republic. And since then, I've traveled to almost 50 countries. So again, this could be you. Great. So now I'm going to sit. And again, thank you for being here. And I'm going to ask a few questions to get the conversation going. There's no space here for my legs. And then, but please just go ahead and raise your hand whenever you have a question. We really, I know we're in a big space, but we really want this to be a discussion for sure. So we talk a lot about UNC. We talk here at UNC a lot about diplomacy, right? And what does that mean? And certainly being a diplomat and at our helm, Ambassador Barbara Stevenson, is sort of a clear way to see what a diplomat is, or for some. But what is diplomacy? Because you can be a diplomat in lots of ways and in lots of fields. So I'd love to know your thoughts about what is diplomacy and what skills are required to be a good diplomat. Floor is yours.
We start with Erin.
Erin, do you want to start?
Oh, yeah, sure. And first of all, I just apologize for not being there in person. I really wanted to be there, but COVID got me. So if I go off screen, it's probably because I'm sneezing or I'm blowing my nose. So I apologize in advance. But I really wish I was there in person. I would say I would define diplomacy, or rather the skills required to be a good diplomat. And it's really great because I know Ambassador Stevenson's in the audience and I got to work with her in London. I love her. I'm so excited that she brought this program to UNC. She was my mentor. I would love to just end the question with an answer of that she taught me how to be a good diplomat. But I will say that listening is obviously one of the best skills to have when being a diplomat. And I think understanding and try to translate not even like different languages, but just how people are coming from different perspectives. And that if we're all going towards the same goal, sometimes you need somebody, a diplomat, that can navigate between different worlds, different views. I think that's really important. I'll stop there.
Great.
I would start by commenting that when you study foreign policy, you look at the different instruments of power, and diplomacy is one of them, and the military is one of them, economic instrument of power. And I would have to say diplomacy is probably the most often overlooked yet most fundamentally important of the state instruments of power in foreign policy. And I say that, and the military will say this, because I think it was General Mattis who said, if you don't invest more in the State Department, you're going to have to buy more bullets for me. And the reason he said that is because the whole purpose of diplomats is to prevent conflict, to resolve conflict, to build bridges, and to reach out to other people, and to do that in a way that demonstrates our shared humanity, regardless of our culture, which is what diplomats do overseas all the time. And so I would just add that the skill set needed for that is empathy, a real ability to understand someone else's perspective that may be different from your own, just because they've grown up in a different culture, and to be able to try and explain your culture and build bridges between the two to better understand one another. And listening, as Erin said, is the key to that. And I think sometimes the thing that we don't do enough of in society and in diplomacy. So that's my humble answer.
Great. So I think my take on diplomacy is slightly different just based on what I do. So I'm currently a spokeswoman for the National Nuclear Security Administration. So I was sort of wrapping my head around, and I don't always necessarily feel like I'm a diplomat. And so I use the best resource out there, Google. And I looked, and I had two definitions, and one of them was the art of dealing with people in a sensitive and effective way. And I was like, oh, well, that is exactly what I do all day, every day. And I think it's really important that you do that in my line of work, because you're doing that every day with the public, but also with principals and senior leadership. And when you're having those tough conversations in effective and sensitive ways. It's helping to guide them so that they can talk with their interagency and international partners also in sensitive and effective ways. So I think one of the best ways to do that, or some of the important skills to have, is focus on relationship building and interpersonal skills. We talked about this at lunch today, that it's really hard to be a diplomat or have conversations diplomatically, and sometimes you're talking about things that you don't want to talk about and the other people don't want to talk about. And if you can break down the barriers of whatever the complicated subject is that you're arguing over and really make it personal, that I'm a Tar Heel or whatever the thing is, it kind of brings it back down to earth, and it's easier to have a real conversation authentically with somebody.
Can I add one thing? Kate just made me think about the importance of relationship building in diplomacy. And I just want to really emphasize that it's so important to build relationships before you need something. So when I go to a new country, the first thing that I do is I reach out to people. I go to lunch or dinner with them. I find out what is of interest to them. I talk to them as human beings. I tell them about my children. And I try to be human with them. And then when you need to have hard conversations, you have this foundation of trust that you can draw from. And hopefully they will as well.
That's excellent. That piece about that, also this idea of language, right? That it certainly, you all have, language skills other than English, right? But it's not only about the foreign language itself. You might not be speaking Farsi when you're having these meetings, but you have put in the legwork, right? You know what it means when someone speaks a different language than you do. And just having that understanding after the process you've gone through to be able to communicate with someone properly, right? To do that with anyone from wherever they come from. So I think that process of learning a language really teaches us a lot of humility and empathy and understanding and respect for that other person, whoever it might be, whether they're speaking that language or not. So what's your favorite part about being a diplomat?
Well, the travel.
Yeah.
I think probably all three of us would say that we have wanderlust, and I have always had wanderlust, whether it was long car journeys in the United States when I was a college student. When I was at Chapel Hill in undergrad, my roommate and best friend got in a car and drove across America. And my mother probably didn't eat for the 2 weeks that we were away, just out of nervousness. But and then the first time I traveled overseas, it was, I just had this feeling, I'm sure it'll resonate with many of you. It's just an excitement and a joy to see other cultures and to see the world through a different lens. And I find when traveling, as I did in the State Department, I would sometimes get something from this special place I had been and put it in my home so that I could be reminded of this beautiful part of another culture. And if you go into any Foreign Service officer's home, it is filled with the most hodgepodge, not matched, not really pretty collection of paintings from special places or a wooden box that someone gave you, and again, it's the symbol of those powerful human connections across cultures. That's such a pleasure and a joy.
Okay. I guess I also said this at lunch. I'm sorry to the people who were there today that you're hearing this again. So I am such a patriot. I love America. I have part of the Declaration of Independence tattooed on my back. And so I think for me, being a diplomat, my favorite part about being a diplomat, if you will, is I really do feel like I'm doing something impactful. I feel that every single day. I feel like I am serving my country. I am making a difference when it comes to national security for a place that I love, and I'm making it safer.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, and I would add on to that what Kay was saying. I mean, my father was in the Air Force. I come from a very service-oriented background. So when I was in the Foreign Service, it was, a really great way to serve my country, but in a different way. And I would also say when I was in the Foreign Service, my 2 tours overseas were actually doing consular work. So if I wasn't helping Americans, who had had babies overseas and they were registering, their children's birth abroad, or maybe they, violated the law and I had to go visit them in prison. But then I was also issuing visas to people who wanted to come and visit America, whether it was for tourism, whether it was work, whether it was to reunify with their family. And I think that was possibly there was no specific story. Consular officers, if you meet a lot of foreign service officers, everybody has to do a consular tour and everybody has really great consular stories. That was my cone. I loved doing it overseas, especially on the immigrant visa side. But just to allow people to come to the United States. I mean, economically, it's great, go to Disney World, go to New York, bring your tourism dollars to the United States. I think was also a really fantastic part of the Foreign Service. Currently in my job in a private sector, a private company, a biotech company, I think that, I feel like I am still a diplomat because I work with a lot of scientists and engineers. I know nothing about vaccines or mRNA. Like, I am not a medical person, but the work that we're trying to do at Resilience, it requires a lot of partnering with the US government. And I understand the US government. I spent 10 years in the government. I know how to navigate the bureaucracy of federal government, translate that into state and local government. But, when you get engineers and scientists in the same room as government employees, sometimes they just don't know how to communicate. So that's a really great job that I have, is trying to help bridge that. Again, sort of my callback to understanding different languages and having them get to a mutual understanding that's beneficial.
Yes, thank you. We know about that. Yes, talking across that social science divide, right? So tell us a little bit more about how you came to your current position and what was the most pivotal moment in your career. You talked a little bit about this at lunch, but where did it happen? Where did the spark, when did you know this is where you wanted to go?
Okay, so I think I want to emphasize what we will all emphasize, that there is no one size fits all path to working in international development or foreign policy or diplomacy or national security. Everybody's story and pathway seems to be very different. So I grew up in Richland, Washington. My hometown produced the plutonium that was used in the bomb dropped on Nagasaki. So I grew up in a town where I really probably should have figured out a lot sooner that this is what I was going to end up doing, but it really didn't happen that way. I wasn't a science person or a STEM person by any means. I loved the government. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to come to DC and change the world through policy. And so I kept having these like random touch points with nuclear technology and nuclear policy. And I think I kept being like, well, that's not for me because I don't want to work in the science field. And then I came to Carolina and I did my master's thesis on nuclear weapons policy, and I started learning Farsi because the Iran deal was happening at the time, and that was a very pivotal moment happening in the news. And I talked to people who were like, there are policy jobs related to nuclear weapons, and I was like, oh well, that's what I should be doing. But I didn't get there until I was 25 or 26, and so I guess I Googled nuclear weapons / internship to just see what was out there. And that's how I found the Scoville Fellowship, which I can't recommend highly enough. So if anybody has questions about that, I'm happy to talk about it. But yeah, that's sort of how I ended up there. And then, I think that the universe really does provide for you. So there were lots of jumping points that didn't make any sense to me at the time, but all of those building blocks sort of got me to the point where I am now, where I am about to start what I consider to be my current dream job I'm about to start, which is great. So that's fantastic. I feel like, thanks universe. But my my pivotal moment, I was talking to my friend Mackenzie about this morning. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to say. I don't know what I'm going to say, but I care very much about trying to translate difficult national security policy issues to regular everyday people. Like, I just want the people to have the power to make decisions and be informed. And that's why I love my job the most. And so I started a program to go speak with high school students about nuclear weapons 101 around the country, starting with the high school in my hometown. And like, my favorite moment in my career thus far was we were collecting these surveys that we'd given to the students at the beginning of class. And we were flipping through them afterwards, and I saw that somebody had written something and then erased it, but I could still see it. So they had like written it and then passed it to their friend. I'm imagining that's how it went down. And it said like, how cool is it that I get to hear somebody who looks like me talking about this? And I think, as you'll come to learn, there are not a lot of women who work in national security, especially. And so I always felt that way, but then to be able to go and talk about my career and see somebody who secretly also thought that I was cool, I mean, that was just a really exciting experience for me.
What's that? That's great.
Erin?
Yeah.
Okay,
you're up.
so I came into the current position. Well, maybe I'll probably start with the most pivotal moment in my career so far. Like we said, I was in the Foreign Service for about 10 years. Love the Foreign Service, the best damn career that I'll ever have. I mean, amazing people. I loved it. But I would have to say that the most pivotal moment was actually when I made the decision to leave the Foreign Service. It's a hard decision because you do so much to get in. It's, you have to go through these tests, and then you go through and you're like, you're now are one of the few people that get in. And you feel like sometimes that you have to stay through it all, even if it might not necessarily work for yourself or for your family or whatnot. And I think I just got to the point in my career, and more importantly, it wasn't necessarily my career, but it was more of my life, that I knew that the continuous going overseas every 2 years moving wasn't going to necessarily work for my family. So I made the decision to leave, and a lot of people supported it, and was able to transition into the private sector, still doing really interesting policy work, international affairs, defense policy work within Raytheon. I was there for about 3 years, recruited by an ambassador who had retired and went into the private sector, and was able to work with him still. But I think the lesson that I learned is that you can still do really interesting work within companies that is still internationally focused, that is still national security focused. For my case, in my current job, this was a company that was born out of COVID and has looks to tackle a lot of health security, economic security, and national security issues in, what happened to us, what happened not only to the United States, but what also happened to the world with COVID, and how we weren't able to manufacture vaccines fast enough. I mean, we found COVID vaccines that could work, but then we couldn't manufacture them fast enough. And so all of the policy and the government lift and the private sector lift that goes into that is, this really cool blend of private public partnership, which is what I'm now focused on trying to help out with. So but my pivotal moment was actually like leaving the Foreign Service. I still miss it. I would, maybe 10 years from now, I'll go back in. I don't know. But I think that's the thing, is that don't be afraid to make changes, even if you have your dream job, or you think you have your dream job. I mean, there's still other things out there that are so incredible. Jen, over to you.
So I too had a circuitous route into the Foreign Service, and I, as Katie mentioned, went to law school here as well, 7 years straight through. I couldn't get enough of Chapel Hill, and I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And I clerked and I would practice law, but before I went to practice law, I studied overseas in England for a year to get an LLM in international law. And I had really no idea what possessed me to do that, because I knew full well I would not be practicing international law in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time. But I wanted to study and live abroad. So I put a map of the world up in my dorm room, and I bought The Economist every week, which for a student was a very big investment. I had to eat like ramen noodles in order to afford The Economist, but and I would teach myself about foreign policy with The Economist, and I just became passionate about it. And then came home, tried to practice law, and then September 11th happened. And I come from a military family too, and I knew I wanted to serve my country. So I took the Foreign Service exam, and I felt blessed every day. I have been a diplomat. It's an honor and a privilege. And I remember the first time at NATO, I sat down in front of the plaque that said the United States. And it's an humbling but overwhelming experience, the pride that you feel about representing the United States. And I've always relished that part of it. But I would say, you know, the pivotal moment in my career was actually the hardest. And it was when I was in Istanbul. And I was there during a very turbulent period. And there were ISIS terrorist attacks in Istanbul on a regular basis. Our families, my family had to be evacuated from Istanbul. There were credible threats against me personally. There were threats against our staff. Several of our local staff underwent some really traumatic experiences. The Syrian civil war was raging on the southern border of Turkey, and we had 1 million Syrian refugees in Istanbul. And as a team, you know, in the Foreign Service, people join because of the service part. That's what draws them to it. So I wanted not only to figure out how as a team we could serve people in need, especially, for example, the Syrian refugees and the children especially, but also how I could be a servant leader, how I could serve my team to help keep them safe, to help us all address our collective trauma, to be mindful of their, not only their safety, but their mental health and their well-being and their ability to see their families. And it was just this powerful moment in my career where I felt like as a team, we really came together and honored each other. And when I left, the staff of the consulate planted a garden in honor of our experience together, and an olive tree in the middle of it. I still get choked up when I talk about it because it was just such a powerful moment and such an honor to be honored by them. So even in dark moments, you can bring light. And that's what I've tried to give my career to. And that's why I've found diplomacy so profound.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's incredible.
Thank you.
Really. Well, very well deserving. Thank you. Wow. And to the two of you too, I think it's really important to talk about these moments that, as you started off saying, that things aren't a straight line. It's not always what our mama tells us.
No,
My
mama told me,
yeah.
be a lawyer.
Not always what we want to end up doing, and finding what you really want to be doing, and finding that value and the positive in those dark times. That's really amazing. And so you've all given such great advice already, but I would love to ask, what's that one piece of practical advice you would give to these folks at this moment in their lives?
Erin, you should go first.
Yeah, I was trying to think about a really good answer before this started. And I think mainly it's just like, go after it. Like, you know, go after your dream job. And I don't know, sometimes I had this issue in State Department where if I was told no, I wasn't always willing to take that as a final answer. But I would say also, like, even if you go after it and you finally get what you think is your dream job, I won't use the example of me in the Foreign Service, but I have a really good friend who also went through the Transatlantic Master, and his dream job, you know, he got his dream job and then he decided like 2 weeks in, like, this is not going to work for me. And so he made the brave decision to like get out. So again, it's sort of like your dreams are going to evolve, go after it, get after it. But then once you get it, like, don't be afraid to continue, finding what is right for you.
Sure, I'll go. I had a coffee with Ambassador Stevenson before this, and she mentioned something. Well, I was mentioning some things, and she was like, "You're going to talk about those, right?" So I'm going to run through them real fast. And so the first one is, for undergrad especially, or for your master's degree especially, you should try to go to a place where you can get the best education that you can, but it doesn't have to be bougie and it doesn't have to be fancy. You just go to where you can get a good education and you can try and do it relatively as cheap as possible, or get somebody to pay for it. There's lots of money out there, so you should do that and try and be debt free. And it, as long as you're taking advantage of every opportunity while you're there and you're building relationships, you're going to be just fine. It doesn't matter. I don't think so much. And if you want to work at the State Department or at the Department of Defense, I think one of the better ways to get in is starting with an internship. Sometimes it's a black hole to try and go through USA jobs. It's a little easier to circumnavigate that system if you start as an intern and you get a clearance very quickly. I'm happy to go on to those things more in depth later. That contract positions are perfectly fine, and that you should definitely get a mentor. But the main thing of practical advice that I really want to say, and Jen and I were talking about this, is lots of people in the national security world and in the DC world are brilliant. It's harder to find authentically good, kind people. And all of my favorite people that I work with, that I love the most, that I would fall over a cliff to work for them and with them, are just genuinely good, kind people. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. Everybody's asking you what skills you should have and what classes you should take, and there is not enough emphasis put on just be true to yourself and be a good, kind human being, because it matters a lot when you work in DC.
Here. And working for Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield, I cannot emphasize that enough, because she has succeeded so much in the Foreign Service because she is kind. She is compassionate and kind, and has this lion-hearted approach to taking care of her team, and that is so valuable in DC and in diplomacy. So I can't emphasize that enough. And in our current global context, human kindness and compassion is sometimes not so readily visible. So practical skill is to practice an act of kindness every day. But I wanted to say one important practical bit of advice, and I offer it as remembering what it was like as a young woman here in Chapel Hill. And I told us a story at lunch about how my mother told my sister that she didn't want us to marry a doctor or a lawyer. She wanted us to be a doctor or a lawyer. And my sister became a doctor. I became a lawyer. I'm so passionate about my mother and her strength and what she wanted for us. What I want to say is that I spent so much of my youth at the point in your lives where you are outsourcing what I wanted to do and be. And I can't emphasize this enough. There's something in you, and this is where I'm going to go hokey, so forgive me, but there's a knowing that's in all of you, and it will tell you what you want to do, how you want to get there, and what will make you feel purpose. And that's what you should do. And no one can tell you what that is. And I don't mean that you shouldn't ask, talk to people, do interviews, understand what different professions are, think about the personality traits that would be most useful in that profession, and consider whether they're yours. In law, for example, being comfortable in conflict is incredibly important. I am deeply uncomfortable in conflict. I value harmony, and law was probably not the right choice for me, but I didn't have the tools yet to think, is this what I want? Is this what I'm going to be good at? And I say this especially to the young women in the audience, because I think so often we're inclined to listen to other people and try and absorb what everyone wants from us. And really what I hope all of you will listen to is your knowing, what you know is right for you, and follow that and be true to it. And then you won't, wake up 10 years later and think, I wish I had done X, Y, or Z that would have made me feel passionate. And the last tiny bit is something Kate and I have talked about. Have fun right now. When we walk around the campus, what it strikes me is that I was so eager to do X and Y and make my resume this and that. And what I should have been doing, if someone had told me, everyone told me, and I just didn't listen. It's the time in your life to have fun, to enjoy friendships, to travel, to be young. So do that. And again, listen to your heart and everything will turn out well.
That is these excellent advice.
Right. Great.
Because exams are coming and
Yes.
end of the semester, and there's a lot on your plates. We know that, but it's really important to take sometimes that zoom out a little bit and think about what is the right thing for you. My dad didn't talk to me for a few days after I didn't accept a job offer from a bank after college. He just thought I was being really
A great
ridiculous. Yes. And that how could I not accept this job? But I did not want that job at all. And he couldn't believe it, even though he had, like you're saying, had always said, you can do whatever you want, you can get it, doesn't matter that you're a woman, right? You can do anything. And then, but I didn't take that job at the bank. But a month later, thank God, I got a job, but of course at a nonprofit, and it took him a minute, but he actually realized that I could pay my own bills and was moving out of the house. And it was going to be fine. I mean, it was like 6 weeks after I graduated, so it was really okay. But this point of and I also not a big conflict person, and didn't really want to disappoint them after they'd helped me get through college. But that was really important to me, to not take something that I did not want at all. And I think that is really important to think about that. It doesn't mean that you're making a decision that's not going to be good for you. It's going to be great for you. So please, what questions do you have? Go right ahead. Oh yes, right, Mike.
Hello, my name is Layla, and I just want to thank you guys for your advice. It was very insightful. I'm a junior here, and that's, the time of your life where you actually have to start thinking about the future. And obviously, I don't know what I want to do, but I know that it maybe might have to do with global studies, but regardless, I want to be abroad. And I just want to ask you guys, how do you deal with aspects such as like culture shock and homesickness, especially when you're so young and vulnerable and like, expanding your boundaries in like foreign lands?
That is real.
Yes.
That is real. Erin, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's tough, but I do feel like, today with Zoom, like how I'm here with you guys now, I mean, I think that's really advantageous. I know when I was abroad for the first time, it was we first started Skyping, but like the connection was terrible, and it would be like a once a week call with my family. But I mean, I think that's great. Just, what I will always say is that, you can find your community overseas. I mean, especially if you decide to go and do, a global studies internship overseas, like, look at, fellowships that can take you into the US Embassy, the missions, there's these fellowship programs and internships that actually have you doing like a summer intern with the embassy or a consulate overseas, and like that community in and of itself is a really good community to tap into. But yeah, homesickness is real, and I don't know. I have 3 sisters, and like it was tough. I'm not gonna lie. I can't sugarcoat that.
I think the fact that you're thinking about it already, Layla, means that you're far further along than I was. So I congratulate you. And homesickness, that's the real part, and a sense of isolation and a sense of everything's different. When you live in a foreign culture, you're having to, get a telephone and sign up for, I mean, I can't do that in America. I can't, and in a foreign language. And it's humbling. And then in addition to that, you feel away from the people that you love and your ballast and the things that keep you even keeled. So I found it was really important to take bits of home with me. Even, if all my stuff was coming a while later, I would bring something from home. A lot of it from Chapel Hill to remind me of my roots. And your roots are so important anytime you go overseas. And then I would reach out. I would reach out when I needed a touch of home or a kind word from a friend. And I would lean into asking for help.
Yeah, I haven't spent my career abroad, but I did do Peace Corps, which is 2 years. And before I left, Peace Corps offered us some advice, I guess, that was, know in your mind what you need to say to your family or what you need to say to yourself to stay. And that can be whatever it was. And for me, I was like, I know that I am not going to be able to come home 2 years, or a lot of people come home in between their 2 years. And I knew that if I had come home, I think I would have had a hard time going back. So I told my family before I left, as hard as it gets, on my hardest day when I'm crying to you on the phone, please just tell me that I can do it and that I can stick it out. Of course, I knew I could always come home if I needed to, but please ask your support system to cheer you on before you endeavor to take it on. And they did. I mean, there were definitely times where I was like, I think I just need to come home. And my mom was like, I know you can do this. And so I think, making sure that you're having those conversations with the people in your life that are here and the people that you bring with you abroad and whatever. I went through something fairly traumatic when I was in the Peace Corps, and I still in that moment, I still had my family who I'm sure that was the hardest thing that they ever had to do, was to sit on the phone and say she told me not to let her come home. So trying to convince me to stay when I was having a really hard time. So have community and tell them what you need. Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that I deal with, and I'm still really young, but I guess just as a woman too, especially in a career where there's not that many men, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? I think that's something that I've had even regardless of being in any career yet. How have you dealt with that? Especially being in an environment where there's not many people necessarily like you.
I'm going to take that one real fast. Imposter syndrome is a real thing. It is a thing that I feel all the time. I feel it today. I feel it literally all the time. So first, acknowledging that it is a thing and that everybody around you is also probably feeling it is really important. It's very valid. Working in a career where it's mostly men for the first few years of my life, I was literally the only person in almost every room that I had a meeting in, and imposter syndrome doesn't help. And trying to learn that you deserve to have a seat at the table is a really hard thing to convince yourself of, especially when you're new and starting a career. This is where mentorship comes in for me. So you need to find those people, find those networks, start with your peers around you before you go out into the career, and then glob on to whoever the person is that you're working with. Find a woman there, reach out to the alumni networks, use all the people that you can to build a network. But I have a women in nuke posse, and we get wine regularly. And I cannot tell you enough. I wouldn't have stayed. I would not have been able to make it and stay in the career that I am in if it wasn't for those women. So find your tribe that will just hype girl you all the time, and that you can also just vent out to, because you're going to need to do it. You're going to need to have a safe space to do so, and they will all be cheering you on along the way.
A few additions. I mean, first of all, yes. my additions are, we heard from Masha Jovanovic last night, and she's one of our most distinguished diplomats, and she spoke very poignantly about having imposter syndrome. It's real. Wendy Sherman, who is the Deputy Secretary of State, a powerhouse diplomat for the Iranian nuclear deal, and she talks about beautifully in her book, imposter syndrome. So you're not alone if you feel it. And, there's this phenomenon I'll talk about, about how people who spread out and just take up all the space, or they violate our soundries, which is boundaries of sound. And what I would tell you is hold your space. When you walk into a room, sit at the table where you belong, hold your space. You are supposed to be there. And then don't be afraid to add your value, add your perspective. And then, just like Kate said, have your group of women. I have the BAW. They're the badass women. And I'll tell you a story. One of them, this incredible African-American woman, there are only 10 African-American women in the senior foreign service. And she wanted to apply for a job, and she felt imposter syndrome about it. And we sat around her as a group, and we put the computer in front of her, and we helped her write her email where she said, Mr. Undersecretary, I am interested in being your chief of staff. I believe that I have these qualities that will, and we helped her draft it. And then she was physically sweating, and we said, hit send, hit send, hit send. And then boom, she hit send. She got the job. So have women who will flood you with a sense of purpose and confidence. Sometimes we flood each other. I'll say, I need to be flooded. And they will write me and say, you're doing it, girl. You're everything. And have those women, or for men, have those men who will, and I don't know that men would say you're doing it, but you're great, bro. Whatever it is, have people around you who will lift you up. And then finally, as a woman, if you're in a meeting with a woman and she says something, repeat it. And I say this because so often in meetings, I've seen that a woman will say something, and then a man will say the same thing. And then everyone will say, I liked what Ed had to say about that. And so if a woman says something and you're another woman at the table, and Wendy Sherman talked about doing this in several NSC meetings, she would repeat something that Susan Rice said, just to amplify it. And that they had a way of amplifying each other and supporting each other. So it's another trick I offer my sisters as a way that you can make your voice heard and have your sister's voice heard in a room where you're probably one of two women in a room full of 30 men.
So yeah,
Part of your clubs.
I mean, everything that Kate and Jen just said, I just want to be like, yes, 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 yes. The only other thing I'll add is something that I've tried to do a lot to combat imposter syndrome is to just say like, and this is more applicable to like when you're looking at jobs. If you're looking at a job requirement and you're like, yes, 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 I can do all of that 100%. That is a job that I can do 100%. You are overqualified for that job. Do not apply for that job. You have to go after jobs in which you can grow. And I'll tell you what, I mean, you'll hear probably a statistic a lot, but something that resonated with me was that about, I think on average, like men will apply for jobs to which they are about 60% qualified for, but women won't apply for them unless they're 100% qualified. So go after the job that like you want to grow into, like break through that imposter syndrome. You can still walk into a room and add value, like Jen was saying, even if maybe like you still have to grow into that job, like get like, I don't know, this is what I'm not saying this to you, but I'm saying this to like myself. I'm like, sometimes I'm just like, get over yourself and like do the job and grow into the job. I tell myself that like almost every day, because I'm, suffering from this right now. Because again, I went into a biotech job where I'm working for a biotech company where I literally cannot remember how like mRNA works. And like, that seems kind of important to me. But like, who cares? I need to still do the job because I bring a different skill set to the job and to the company that I'm working for.
right? Go ahead.
Hi, is this on? Okay, cool. Hi, so I'm Scarlett Hawkins. I am a Rotary Peace Fellow in the graduate program. Little plug for that if you're interested in getting a fully funded MA. But my question is, okay, so in 2018, Ronan Farrow released the book about the war on diplomacy. And obviously subsequently, you know, there's been a change in administration. There's been sort of a recommitment, at least, you know, in the early stages to really sort of bolstering the State Department again and getting it back to where it was. Historically, I guess, like in sort of recent years, maybe diplomacy was a trickier sort of profession to advocate people to be entering in. My question is, I guess, then, what do you see as being, do you see the coming years as being a place of optimism for diplomacy, for young people who are interested in entering the field?
It's a great question. And I read that book when I was in Turkey. And one of the things that was most impactful for me was thinking through his description of how the State Department had struggled in terms of its role in the interagency for the 20 years of the war on terrorism, where the military instrument had replaced the diplomatic instrument as the key foreign policy tool. And often we would find as diplomats, our voices were drowned out in interagency discussions. So I think what he had to say about, you know, the slow creeping dismantling of the primacy of diplomacy in our foreign policy was impactful. I think, and you know, some of the institutional struggles that we've had have been hard, and I don't want to minimize them. I want to share that I was the director of orientation at the State Department about 2 or 3 years ago. So I was bringing in the incoming diplomats, and you know, it feels like a very uncertain world. And at this point, many of us were getting used to doom scrolling and just seeing all the problems in the world. And I could tell that many of them felt pretty anxious about starting a career in diplomacy. And what I want to say to anyone thinking about it is, we need you. We need you. We need smart, open-minded, committed, patriotic Americans who understand that we are Americans. You know, we're not blue or red, we're Americans. And we need our best overseas, representing us, telling the world about the unique role the United States plays in the world. And I'm one of those admittedly corny people who believes that there is an exceptionalism about the United States. We make mistakes all the time. We've made a lot of them in foreign policy, but what's most powerful is that we're willing to acknowledge we make mistakes. We're willing to try and learn from them, and we're willing always to be to try to be a force for good in the world, to development work, democracy promotion, things that are very valuable, and societies that are free, where democracy flourishes, where there's trade that lifts everyone up. These are American values. And so promoting them is essential, I think, for global peace. So we need you. So please join us as we all have to, in this moment where there's so many authoritarian voices right now, and it feels like there's been this tide shift, right? That democracy was taking hold, and then in the past 10 or 20 years, we've seen authoritarianism on the rise, corruption on the rise, really global trends that are deeply worrisome. And you have to be the generation that turns the tide back. No pressure, but we're counting on.
I hope you feel invited.
Yes, please.
And then we'll check the Zoom room.
So, hello. I've been recently thinking about studying a new language. However, I've talked to a lot of people, and especially my parents, they've said that if there's a small chance of you using the language in the future, there's no purpose in studying a new language. So if I were to take on a new language, even if I don't use the language in the workforce, what are some benefits of it?
So I'm a big proponent of learning a language. I think that you don't just learn a language, right? Like you learn a culture and you learn a history and you learn to understand a totally different group of people and a different mindset, and you brought in your own mindset. And I think that is number one, the main reason why you should learn a language. I think everyone in America should learn another language. We would be a better country if everyone in America spoke another language. So, first and foremost, you should do it for that reason. Second reason is you want to work in national security or international development or diplomacy, you have to have one. And you might not ever use it. Unfortunately, I speak Farsi, I speak Romanian, I speak Russian. I use them almost never, and it's really depressing. But I put it on paper because, at some point I did used to speak them fairly well. And people want to see it on the resume, and two, it usually ends up being a really good talking point in an interview. So from a practical standpoint, just for getting a job in the field, it is kind of necessary. And from you'll be a better global citizen, you should definitely learn one.
I think you'll be surprised where you would find to use a language. I'll just use the example of a friend. She was in my foreign service class. Her first tour was Nepal. She learned Nepali. But we would meet up all the time in like London, in Dubai, everywhere. I swear, even here in the DC area where I live still currently, we would be studying our languages mutually, and she would run into Nepali immigrants or people that spoke Nepali, like in London, in Dubai, and she would bust out with her language skill, and it was just the most magical thing for them to see that. So, I mean, yes, Nepali is a very, sort of discrete language, but I think, like Kate said, I love that concept of, you learn an additional language and you become a global citizen. I mean, people in Europe, they easily switch between, 3 or 4 languages like it's nothing. And, here in the United States, it's just, it would be remarkable if we all could have like a second or third or fourth language skill. I mean, how incredible would that be?
I think also when you learn a language, you find a way to speak it. That it sort of follows. You become interested in more than just the grammar. You become interested in what is happening there, and you find a way to go there and to study abroad and be immersed and speak to those people because you want to use it. So I think that, not to say that maybe your parents, I get it, I get it. But I think if this is, like we talked about, if this is what you want, it will serve you so well because of there's so many benefits to it. It's not just the idea of I will use it if I move there. There's just so many touch points that you have with people. And then again, this idea of understanding that someone has a different perspective, even if it's not the language that you learned, and then just that humbling experience. It's very worthwhile.
One last thought, we learn when we learn languages how much nonverbal communication is a part of language. And if and when you learn another language, just speak it. Like just lean in and know that you're gonna talk pretty. It's not gonna be pretty. But you find that there's this huge generosity of spirit if you try to speak to someone in their language, and that the whole point of language is to communicate, and you can communicate even if it's not perfect. I learned Turkish in my 40s when my brain is like calcifying and old. And I knew sometimes when my Turkish colleagues would sort of look at me like, I don't know what that was. But I tried, and we communicated, and they loved that I tried. So just don't let perfection get in the way of communication.
we have any questions on the Zoom chat?
One question. So thinking back on either, your undergraduate time or graduate or professional program, what's one thing that you wished you would have taken advantage of?
I was saying earlier that I would have, that it was the extracurricular activities, seriously, that I appreciated and that I learned a lot from. And in your extracurricular activities, even if it's like Frisbee golf or some kind of team sport or something, a service project. When I was here in law school, you guys won't remember this, but it was 1997, and a student with a mental illness shot several people around Franklin Street. And then my law school classmates and I, maybe it was 90, 95, we got together and did a gun buyback, where as a team, we tried to buy any guns that were in a closet that may be used by a child, or just a way of making a community safer. And then we made art, melted it down and made art. And just those ways where you can be impactful in your community. You're gonna get a first-rate education at UNC in your classroom. So take the opportunity also to figure out how to be a good part of your community.
Erin, do you have anything to add?
Anything that I would have done differently? Well, I mean, I guess, yeah, because I wish I had spent more time in Chapel Hill, honestly. But I mean, the program, the program that I did, again, it was just the fall semester that I was here. And in fact, just a really funny story is that, I wasn't there for the spring, season when basketball was playing, but my class was 2005, 2006. And so I wasn't here, I was working, but a lot of my grad school classmates were like European, and they went to a football game in the fall in 2005, and there was all these people sitting behind them that a lot of people kept coming up behind and just coming up and talking to them, like girls coming up and talking to these guys sitting behind them and just being like, oh, it's so great to see you. Anyways, they were really tall basketball players that were they were like the 2005 conference champion team that was sitting behind them, and they had no clue that they were sitting behind that, UNC championship team that was receiving their rings during the football halftime. So I don't know. I wasn't even there, but I'm just like, I wish I had just spent more time at UNC. Like, it's a great campus. I remember it, but it's also was a blur because it was like 4 months and then it was over. So maybe that's my regret. Not very substantive, sorry.
Oh, it's great to share, yes. So we're just after 6, and we know there's pizza, and 2 out of 3 of these wonderful people will be out there with us. So I'll close it here. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your insightful questions. Thank you to the 3 of you, really, so much.